All right, here we are, week 2 of the Ripples, and this week we have Liz and Macy, and we're going to be talking and touching on the impact of influences and people that really spoke into your life. And thank you for joining me, ladies.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, thanks for having us today.
All right, so going along with the theme of the messages, it's the ripples, right? So it's how things impacted your life, right? So I'd like to open it up with Liz. Start off with sort of your backstory, where it all started, where that led you, up to pretty much here. And you don't have to go into great details, but just sort of walk us through sort of what that looked like.
Yeah, so I grew up in Masontown, PA, so not far from here. I was a family of 2 brothers, 2 sisters, 5 of us total. My dad lived with us for a short period of time, and then one day he just walked out on my mom and us. So really close with my brothers and sisters. Grew up in a pretty dysfunctional home, so we really relied on each other a lot through a lot of the different things that we have seen. Into my teen years, so childhood into my teen years, I would ride a church bus to church. So I went to a local Baptist church. They had an amazing bus ministry. Bill and his wife Nina and their children were actually a part of that. So we're dating back years ago because I'm almost 30. I know that's scary. Let's not talk about too much, but
let's not talk about that.
So we're dating it back, and I love to be on that church bus. The people were so loving. I learned a ton about God in Sunday school, in the class. Into my teen years, I was able to help in the toddler ministry. So Bill's kids were even in that class. Emma was in my class, and I got to serve in that capacity. I got to help with kids worship. I got to help in the ministry, in the nursery. I loved the different ministries that I was involved in. And Bill and Nina would actually pick me up midweek service when we were going to that church. So we all attended together, and he would pick me up, and it was just really good. It really grew my faith, and being in that church and that ministry around people that love Jesus was such a safe place for me, coming from the background that I had grew up in. There was a lot of different forms of abuse, alcoholism, some different addictions, very dysfunctional at many different points, but church was always a safe place for me. I felt safe there. So much so that I ended up, when I graduated high school, ended up going to Bible college. So I went to Bible college for just a short amount of time. When I was in Bible college, I walked away from the Lord briefly, not fully, but I was in a prodigal daughter stage, so I had walked away from the Lord, and I was living in sin for a period of time. I started dating Joe, my now husband, and we were very sinful. We lived together, we weren't married. We were doing all the adult things, so I had walked away from the Lord for that period of time. Also, around the time that I met Joe, about a year later, my youngest sibling had died in a tragic accident. So yeah, my little brother Ronald, he drowned in Cheat Lake. That was a really pivotal point for me with my faith. God really showed up in some tangible ways. Not long after his death, I got pregnant with my first son, Eli. Joe and I weren't married yet, but we were pregnant. We decided, at that point, I contemplated abortion. I was a young mom. I was 19. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. But Joe ended up talking me into keeping the baby. So we all know Eli now. About a year after that, we got married. We had another son. We had then walked through our abortion, which was after Cooper. And then wasn't long after, a couple years later, we had Kinsley. And I came to Crosspoint. So Bill and Nina have been my friends for a very long time. Fun fact, they actually were friends with Joe. They were friends with me. One random day, Joe and I met at Bill and Nina's house, and he's not left me alone ever since. So we're married, been together for about 11 years, married for 8. We started coming to Crosspoint in 2018. So Bill and Nina and Joe and myself, we are the type of friends that like we may go some seasons and we're together all the time, and then we may have seasons that we're not together as much, but the love's still there. We're always there if, someone needs something. They are truly some of the most reliable friends that I have in my life in so many aspects. If you need something, you call Nina and she's going to answer the phone. Don't call me because I'm not answering the phone. I'm not reliable like that.
Kinsley went on the phone.
But Crosspoint had gone to 2 services, and I had moved over to Jefferson area. And at that point, my kids were 4, 2, and I had a newborn. And getting up for church was just very difficult at that season because Joe works on Sundays, so he's not available to help me get the kids ready. And I just felt like I can't get up and be at church super early. So Crosspoint was doing 9 and 11 a.m. services. So I was able to feel like I could conquer the 11 o'clock and come and indulge. And I'll tell you what, as soon as we came to Crosspoint that first Sunday, I encountered Anne Marie. And she was actually Ronald's school teacher. And leading up to that moment, I had always looked for my brother in different parts of my life. And so, if I could find a correlation or a connection, it just really spoke to me. And that first moment, that first day that I met her, she was coming off worship and she greeted me and she's like, I know you. And I'm like, I don't know you. And we're going back and forth. And we come to the conclusion that, she was my brother's teacher. And I just instantly knew this was home for us. I just instantly knew that. After I had Eli, so now we're dating it back about 9 years ago, I had my son Eli in 2013. Macy and I, we were in dental assisting school together. And we did not know it, but we only lived about 10 minutes apart. Yes. And one day she was working at Walmart and we're coming through the checkout line, Joe, myself, and our little baby. And Joe's like, why don't you guys just ride together? We were going to school in Pittsburgh. Gas was expensive, it costs a lot to go every day. And so we started riding together for college and we've just been besties ever since.
Yep.
That's pretty much how it happened. I know.
All right. Well, it seems like there is a lot to unpack.
So much.
Yeah. So it seemed like a lot of ripples, good ripples and bad ripples. And so before we get to that, though, I'd like for Macy to sort of walk through that same up to this point, right? So that it gives a little bit of a backstory so that people can sort of relate whenever you're speaking.
Yeah. So I had a pretty normal childhood, but I was okay up until I had graduated. So my father passed away in 2014, and then my mom passed away and my grandfather passed away. So I had a lot of darkness after I graduated. And so Liz and I met in college, and she had been so faithful for so long, and I fell into this dark depression. Truly, if it wasn't for my husband, Curtis, I don't know. He was my blessing when I didn't even know the Lord. Liz was my blessing when I didn't even know the Lord. I've only been walking with the Lord for about 8 months. So I was in depression and had a lot of anxiety for about 8 years. Liz for 8 years had asked me, when you come to church, when you come to church, when you come to church. And I'm like, I don't know. I felt that for a long time, it just wasn't for me. I drank all the time. My husband and I were the couple that brought the cooler to the party. Like, that was who we were, and not that I'm proud of that at all, but it is where I found myself filling the voids, but never truly satisfying those voids. And it wasn't until Christmas Eve of last year, we went to Waynesburg campus. And it was our very first service, like actually coming to Crosspoint. And after that, my husband and I were like, this is it. But before that, Liz's husband was in a motorcycle accident, and she has been so faithful to the Lord and what God had provided with her in that time. So Crosspoint, the support that God allowed her to have in that time while her husband was unconscious, really, showed me like what faithful looked like. He provided funds, he provided workers for food and kids, and just for her to be able to still be so faithful in such a dark time was like, man, like what am I doing with my life? Like I can have that too if I just fully surrender my life to the Lord. And so in January of this year, we were asked, I came to a service and Pastor Josh had chips. It was like an all-in 2022. And I was like, you know what, this is all I have to give. I'm ready to give my life to the Lord. And I've been walking in such a great time. So now I'm still working on my faith, as in still learning. You know,
You're still working on your faith.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So we all are, right?
Yeah.
So one day at a time, and not everything is fixed the moment that you say yes.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Because there's still consequences and repercussions of certain actions or certain choices. Right? So just because in that moment you were like, yes, this is it.
Yeah.
It's still the effects of the ripples up to that point.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So how did you start pushing back on some of those ripples or some of those effects that were still coming at you after you said yes?
So, when I had said yes, I was like, I'm all in. Nothing is going to shake me off of my path because I want to be free. I want to be walking in freedom, and the Lord can give you that as long as you're willing to follow His commands. You know, it's so hard to describe because once you truly lay down all of your luggage and your burdens and He gives you that freedom, there's nothing on this earth that like I truly would not do for the Lord. He has freed me from so many things, and just diving deeper into the Word and diving into relationships within the church, like your life fully changes for the better. I mean, when you accept the Lord, your walk is not easy, but is so much better. So much better. And I don't know how to describe it, to be honest, but you know, I am fed not only through like services, but when I see youth and the children just want to grow closer to the Lord, it's like, it just does something for my heart, truly. It's like, I don't know.
It's like you get to see like almost a payment for your actions, right? It's like that's an instant gratification, not in a bad way, right?
Yeah.
Because the world wants you to have instant gratification in ways that within moments are empty, right? And they paint pretty pictures to make it look like that, and the youth buy into that. And you're getting to see your decision of yes and what that looks like. And we probably won't get to see what the impact is for years to come, right? But we might have the next Chris Dotson sitting in our youth group, or the next Josh Koss, right? So, yeah, from my perspective, working with the youth as well, I feel the same way. Like,
Yeah, it's even today when we did Next Gen Sunday, like just to see them worshiping the Lord, and you know, some of them do believe that the songs that we sing, like some do it for the fun and that's okay, but they're still getting fed right now and they're not realizing how God's moving right now, because seeds are always planted. It's just when they pop up and grow is truly the beautifulness of the Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, back to Liz, you are a product of almost like a youth group, maybe not to a Crosspoint's level of youth group, but you grew up in a church's youth group, riding a church bus and stuff. So you yourself were part of a youth group. I wasn't necessarily part of a youth group growing up, and I don't know if you were or not. But so from that perspective, you got to see the outpouring of workers and the hearts of people and stuff. So what has that led or spoke, or how has that affected your life?
Yeah, so I think that when I think about how my teen years impacted me today, when I was a teenager, I couldn't go to these different youth functions without the support of a church family. So whether it was the Crows or some other families in our church at that time, which I will not say their names just to respect that, but they would pay for me to go to church camp or to go to our little conference. And in those moments when you just get to connect with other teens and you find things to relate to, and you just have other teens across the world going through what you're going through or whatever, we would go to these big, massive youth events as well. And to just have those people sow into my life, it then just really creates the passion in me to sow into the next generation. So whether that's Joe and I helping send some kids upstairs to kids camp, or Joe being able to go as a counselor to sow into them that way, me being able to teach and seeing the passion there, just because I know what someone had done for me setting that path, right? Like the Bible says, train up a child the way they should go, and when they're older, they won't depart from it. And so I think of some times in my life where I stepped away from what God would have had me do. But it's really amazing when you get to take a step back and reflect, and you can see where He takes the mistakes that we make and He makes some miracles. And so to be able to use some of the mistakes in my past and just sow into another child and help them avoid that, or help them through that if they slip into the same patterns. And to also just come alongside the youth group and support the amazing kids that we have, like through Pie Auction and through these different avenues. God has been so good to Joe and I, and He blesses us. And one of my biggest gifts is giving. I love to give. So just to be able to give to these kids through Pie Auctions or through the Valentine's Day banquet, and just to come alongside and support these kids and to help them get there, because we have a lot of teens in our church that they can't get there if we don't sow into it. So I guess just having that seed planted in my life to then turn around and be able to sow into other children, like it really just taught me the importance of that.
So the whole idea of this came from a conversation that Josh, Paul Peternell, Nina and I were having. And ultimately it come down to one man's yes laid the foundation to get to where we're sitting today, right? Yes. Paul Peternell saying yes to picking up a teenage boy on a church van and taking him to a youth group. The young man was Josh. Mm-hmm. So Paul saying yes led to Josh being able to say yes. That led to Crosspoint. That led to Macy, to Liz, to myself. Like, the impact of one yes.
Yeah.
So thinking of it from that perspective, can you think back to that one point of your one yes that was that moment for you, right? So Josh's moment of yes, I have a moment of yes, Paul has a moment of yes. What is that for you? And you touched on it a little bit about, yes, we're going to make that change at Christmas Eve in Williamsburg, right? So what got you to that point?
Ooh, So shortly after Liz's husband's accident, my husband and I were spending too much time in the bar. We're spending money on other things, and it came to a point where our truck was repossessed. And we looked at each other and we were like, this is not the life that we want to live. This is not our purpose. This is not where we're supposed to be. So we truly became some of the things that we were hanging around, if that makes sense. We were not surrounding ourselves with godly people, godly decisions. Nothing about what we were making was godly. And the effects of that is that we, had our truck repossessed. But in that moment, Liz she's always been a blessing in my life, but she really was still so faithful, even though she knew the mistakes that I was making and the decisions that we were making, and we still fell short. She still was there to pick me up. And I was like, I never want to get back to that point. Like, something has to change. So that was like October, November. And I was like, babe, we need to do something. Curtis, like, we are not doing this. Like, this is not it. And I saw the faithfulness of God in Liz's life during the accident, and that was my yes. I was like, this is my yes. Like, if he can be so faithful in such a dark time for her, like, what can he do for me too? Like, I want that as well. Like, I want to be able to be so faithful to the Lord to where, like, I can speak into other people's life at the same time, because she was going through her darkest time, yet she was still faithful to the Lord and being, I don't know how to explain it. Like, she was in a dark time, but she was still helping me. But her strength really came from the Lord. And it was so impactful for me. So I honestly don't know why, but I mean, that kind of sums it up.
Okay.
Of why I said yes. Like, I mean, it's hard to explain, but that was my yes.
Okay. So hearing it from that perspective, somebody might hear that and say, man, that's a lot of pressure, right? Like, I have to live up to that standard because everybody's watching, right? Like Chris mentioned today, like, the youth is watching everybody in the church, and if it's everybody's in the church's responsibility to make sure that we call each other up and call each other out in a way that is building up, right? So Macy's watching all of your moves, and in those moments, and in that moment in your life, I've never been through anything like that. Most people haven't, right? So how, in that moment, did you find it yourself? Because most people wouldn't hold on to their faith. They would more like look at it and say, why did you let this happen, God? And almost walk away from him in that moment. So what kept you sort of anchored in those ripple moments that kept you here and grounded?
Yeah, so that's a good question. When Joe's accident happened, it was obviously so sudden. At that point in time, we had been coming to Crosspoint for about 2.5 years, somewhere in that area. And the year before, Joe and I got married in 2014, and we have had probably every kind of mess you could have in a marriage. We have walked through so much stuff. Like, I tell people all the time that our marriage is just a product of God's mercy and grace, because normal people could not stay married, right? Like, if they had gone through some of the toxic events that we have gone through and some of the different struggles. And so the year before, in 2019 even, many people don't know this part, but I was fully ready to divorce Joe and leave him. He was really struggling with some things. I did not feel called to help him along those paths any longer. It was very toxic, and so I was ready to divorce him. I was ready to move out, pick up, be done. And actually, we had some prophets come to the church, and that Sunday, and when I was processing that and going through those things, no one really knew the extent of what I was dealing with, because I'm a very private person. So for most people that don't know me, like, as extroverted as I am, when I'm struggling and going through a dark time, I don't call for help. I don't ask for help. It's actually a really terrible trait that I picked up in the environment that I grew up in, because you learn to be independent and not rely on people. You become really self-reliant. So I was going through a really hard time. These prophets spoke into me so tangibly, and without knowing the extent of my situation, this prophet told me that I needed to stay with my husband, stay married, and stay the course. And so just from her speaking into me in such a tangible way, I'm like, how did you know that? And she's like, God told me. And I'm like, wow, like, and I knew truly in that moment it was from the Lord, because what she had said was so direct and spot on that there's no way she knew that. Because, you know, it was that moment like, I didn't tell anybody, like, how do you know that, you know? So all that to say, I stayed the course. And so a couple months went by, things still weren't great. I ended up moving out for a few months just for us to get our bearings and take a break from it and figure out what was going on. And, you know, about a month later, we restored, we reconciled, we were going through the thing. So now we're into 2020, this pandemic hits, and honestly, Joe and I were in one of the best places we had been in such a long time. And so that summer when his accident happened, I remember initially kind of like, God, why'd you do this? Like, he's serving you, he is growing in his walk with you. For many years, Joe did not serve the Lord. And I had seen in that time, in those 8 months of 2020, so much growth in him that I was so confused on why God would allow this to happen, because I believe that God will use hard circumstances to force us towards him. If we're not willing to go towards God on our own, he's going to put some kind of catapulting factor into place, and he's going to break us until we need him, right? Like, he will break us and mold us and bring us to that place of needing him. And so I just felt like, God, why'd you do this? Like, he was already working his way towards you. Like, what's going on? But I knew in that moment, the only thing that would change anything was the Lord. I had some really hard moments. So his accident happened on a Friday, and Saturday, things looked so terrible from what the doctors were saying and some of the prognoses that he had received. And so that Saturday, I just felt like, Lord, what? And so I listened to a song called Rejoice, and it talks about even in the hard moments, like choosing to rejoice, right? So like, we can't always choose the situations that we're in and the things that we go through and the struggles that come to us, but we always have the choice to rejoice and to worship in those moments. And so as depressed as I felt that Saturday when I had come home from the hospital, I decided I had the choice. I could choose to worship the Lord through it, or I could choose to focus on the situation. And it was very hard, but I chose to rejoice in those moments. And I remember coming to church the following Sunday, and us just being able to, like, my church family coming around me and like supporting me, it just like kind of fueled my faith. Like, okay, yes, I got this. And just to have a prayer team behind you, that like when I'm saying, hey, this is what the doctors are saying, but like, I need some people to believe this with me. You know, it's really spot on. The time that we're doing this podcast, even because his accident happened August 7th of 2020. And so in these days after the accident, right, like Facebook's really great at reminding us of memories, right? And so a lot of the memories that are flooding my feed right now are like some of the prognoses and some of the things that they were saying. And so the one I love is, just 2 days ago, the one report they gave me said that Joe would never talk, he would not walk, he would pretty much be in a vegetative state for the rest of his life. And in my Facebook post, I'm saying, but I rebuke it, and I need some people that are going to pray this way with me. And if you're not going to believe this with me, don't pray. Don't pray for me. I need you to pray this way, that he would have no deficits or minimal deficits. And I clung to that. And so every time the doctors came against me, I'm like, no, Satan, I rebuke it. No, my God is bigger than this. And so staying in the Word, staying in meditation with the Lord, praying. I remember one time Pastor Andrew, so I started to drop a couple pounds, and people in loving ways were concerned about me, and I appreciated that. But I remember one time Pastor Andrew talking to me about, like, have you eaten? And I'm like, Pastor Andrew, I'm praying and I'm talking with the Lord. I'm good, buddy. And he just was like, okay, and so in those moments, I just knew I had to go to bat in the spiritual realm, and I'm grateful for people that came alongside me. And I know there were moments that people kind of said, Liz, you're crazy, but I'll pray that way with you. And I'm like, no, I don't need you to believe I'm crazy. I need you to believe that this can actually happen. You have to have the faith behind these prayers. Like, don't pray a half-hearted prayer, right? Like, don't be lukewarm with me. I need you to be praying this way. Right. I need you to just back up, because it's happening this way. And through that accident, there were some secrets that came to light, and some ungodly things that Joe was doing. And I can say that because I know that he would say it, and he has shared his testimony with others. But through the course of his accident, I had even found out other things that made me so angry, some of the betrayal and forgiveness that I had to walk through. But one of the things that God had told me through that time was that hurt feelings do not like holy instructions. And so sometimes we end up in situations where we think we're above what the Bible says, but we're not. Like in some of these scriptures where God's commanding us to forgive and commanding us of these things, we think that our situation excludes us from following those commands. But I just tried to consciously walk in the choice of, I'm subjected to all that God has. And I had to forgive Joe of some very big things and some very hard things. Some things that I would not even feel comfortable to publicly say, because I am protective of Joe's reputation. And unfortunately, sometimes people will twist things. But God really cultivated a heart of forgiveness in me through that time. And I think that that's what shines. I think that just staying faithful to Him, right? Like when we have the knowledge of Jesus and we apply it to our lives, then we are transformed. And I think through that time, God just transformed different parts of my heart. And that's the thing that people cling to. I think when they see Joe as a miracle, it's twofold. It's the physical healing that he received. It's the spiritual healing and transformation that he received. But I think that sometimes people will come to me and say, like, Liz, you were so faithful. You were so this, like God worked in such a big way. And I think it's just, I have truly seen Him move in my life, that I knew He would do it again, even if it didn't look like what I wanted it to look like. I remember one time when I was disappointed with the actions of a day, like I was expecting more healing or more to be evolved, a week into his accident. And I had asked the Lord early on, I said, Lord, like when Joe was missing and I had no idea where he was, I just was like, Lord, just please let him be alive. Like, show me where he is. Let me help him. And when things were not going well, and this was about 2 weeks into the accident, I was headed to the hospital one day, and I was a little discouraged, like, God, I thought he would be awake by now. I thought he would have this miraculous healing by now. Like, I thought you would have done it by now. He said to me, like, remember when you just wanted him to be alive? And so just that perspective of, like, yes, Lord, you can do it, but even when you don't always do it, I still choose to worship you through those struggling moments, because like our position and the way we fight when we're in those positions, it influences people. Like just knowing that He orchestrates all the different things in our lives to touch somebody. So like even if Joe would have had to have died, I would have clung to the hope that it was purposeful in reaching somebody. Even if, even when my brother died, I had done an interview with the news, and I remember telling them, like, God's in control, there's a plan, there's a purpose. I think that through these extreme circumstances, God just sees His kingdom flood, and it touches people, right? Like, I don't know that anything else would have touched Macy because I have pestered her for so many years. Like, come on, you don't know what you're missing. Truly, in the sense of like, I just want you to see God the way I see him, and I just want you to experience him the way I've experienced him. But I guess just being like consistent in my faith and doing all the small things that accumulate right to the big ripple, because it just takes a small stone, but like those consistent small stones that ripple into Macy rising up and being this amazing youth leader. I also think Joe's accident, one of the like personal ripples in my life, is his accident led him to the Lord, like genuine conversion, like he's transformed on fire for the Lord. And it also opened us up to come to a place together to heal from our abortion. And so for me, going through Deeper Still and receiving such a complete healing from my abortion, God just like flooded. I'm telling you, his joy and peace just came upon me like never before. I ended up getting baptized in the Holy Spirit. And I think that I've just been, I don't know, he's just used me to orchestrate some different things and to influence some people through that. I think it's just like one of the amazing ripples of my own healing. Like you said, like coming to salvation, like that's just the tip of the iceberg. Then we have to deal with all the ripples that we've endured, all these traumas, all these different coping mechanisms, anxiety, depression, fear, my abortion, alcoholism. Joe dealt with alcoholism for many years. All of these ripples create things that then need addressed. And so coming to a place of healing and coming to full freedom, you know, I think you can just walk in your purpose so much more effectively. And then when you're walking, you're coming from that pain to purpose. And now, like Bill's walking in his purpose, you're walking in his purpose. People look at that and they like gravitate towards it, right? Like we all have voids, and we know that Jesus is the only void that can fill it. And it gives people that hope, like, look what she has. I want that. Yeah. Like the kids just flock to Macy now. I'm actually feeling a type of way because the kids that flock to me are now flocking to Macy instead of me. But it's amazing because they see the joy that she has and the fire in her, and they just want that. And you know, I was thinking about this. I don't have the same call on my life for youth that you guys do. Like, I love kids' church. I love serving kids. I tried to rope Macy into kids. She wasn't having it. But I love serving kids. I could have never filled the shoes that Macy fills, right? Like, I could never be as effective as Macy is. And so when we're not walking in a genuine way and an authentic relationship with the Lord, we're not sending out those ripples that then entices the Macy to come get on board, right? Like if we're not bringing on those friends that can come serve the Lord with us and create bigger ripples, like we're not doing what we're called to do. You know, like none of us could ever reach everybody that there is to reach. Pastor Josh can't reach everybody that there is to reach. But when we get on board and then we're sending out our ripples to our pools of people, you know, our influential groups, then we're bringing those people along. The more that come on board, the bigger impact our ripple is altogether. Like, it's really cool just to see it. I think it's really cool too just to see such transformation in people that, you know, like I've known Bill for years, and just to see, like, I'm sure the same with me, like see him come free, break free of things, and for me to break free of things and you break free, like we are having such an impactful ripple on the next generation. Like it's awesome.
Yeah, and like listening to some of your story, right? The ups and the downs.
Yeah.
So in life, whether you're causing ripples or you're dealing with ripples of somebody else's choices or whatever, there's certain times that you're high and you're low, right? Because you're riding those ripples. So on the high times, it's like you can sort of see the direction, you can see the way that you want to go. But then on the low sides, you got ripples all around you, and it almost feels overwhelming in some ways, right? It's the way that, in my mind, that's what it feels like sometimes, because it's like you had your moments, right? It's like I was expecting something else, but this is what I've dealt with, and this kind of sucks. right? But then the next moment you're like up and you're on top, and that feels great, right? So from the perspective of having somebody who was speaking into your life that way, right? And come to church, come to church, come to church. And in the moment of watching her walk through that, up to that point, I guess sort of talk a little bit about like, did it come across as like almost nagging? Did it like, and the reason I'm asking the question is so people out there that would be watching this or listening to this, maybe they have a Liz in their life, right? And maybe that person is coming off to them as like, just leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with your church. I don't want anything to do with religion. If God was this, then he wouldn't allow this to happen, right? But from your perspective, having that Liz in your life and now being where you're at, like, what would you say to somebody that has that going on in their life?
So for me, it wasn't nagging, because I mean, we're just, friends. This is what she's passionate about. This is what she's called to. She's called to bring people to the Lord, right? We all are, in a sense. And so for me, I would just say yes, because you don't know until you know. And the freedom and just being free of everything that you have held on to for such a long time. And I would say just say yes. Like, I don't know how else to explain it. It's not a nagging, it's truly, so I tell this to my youth students, I can only share what I've been through, but we as leaders want you to not carry the same shame, guilt, luggage that we've carried for so long, because we know what the Lord can do for us. We know what he can heal us from.
Yeah.
So like truly everybody needs a Liz, because everybody has something they need freed of. Everybody has burdens that they need to lay down. And when they do that, you can just fully serve the Lord in the purpose that he has chosen for you. I don't know how else to describe it. Just say yes.
Yeah, no, that's, so it sounds simple, right?
Yeah, it's very
yeah, very much so, because like you mentioned, there's certain things that now you have to deal with, right? And everybody has a monster inside of them, and it's what you wake it up to or what you feed it that now you have to deal with. That's what I keep trying to tell Micah, right? So he keeps coming at me about certain things or certain questions, and it's like, listen, pal, I said, my monster was alcohol, right? And that some days I was able to control it, and some days I wasn't able to control it. And the outcome or the results of that caused other people to have to deal with the ripples that I caused, right? So if he never touches it or never drinks it, then he will never know what he is with it. So I don't know if I felt like I needed to say that. So, as far as scripture goes and Bible reading and things like that, as far as staying in the Word, praying, and your walk, what do you find yourself sort of as your staple or that you go back to all the time, as far as, yeah, that's my verse, or that's my moment, or that's my song, or that's my fill in the blank that sort of gets you through or sort of rights the ship again, I guess you'd say?
That's hard for me, because I'm really that person that I highlight everything. Like, right? Like when I'm reading the Bible, I'm like, highlight, like that, highlight. I think one thing that really grounds me is, we all know the story of Joseph, or I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but Joseph in Genesis, when they're going through the story, I don't know the exact verse, but it's in chapter 50. There's a part where the Bible talks about, you intended to harm me, but God intended this for good. And when I think of different circumstances in my life, I just can relate to that so much. Joseph, he was betrayed by his family, But God used that pain to rise him to a place of purpose. And his purpose then was to save many people. Like, God orchestrated that all and used it for his good. And some of the hard things that I've walked through, as much as I hate that it's a part of my story, I can reflect and see how God uses those things in my life for good. Even Joe and I, our marriage struggles and some of the problems that we've had, there truly were times in our marriage where he intended to harm me. There was a point where Joe was not a Christian, I was a Christian. We were not equally yoked. We did not fight fair. He could be very manipulative towards me, and it just caused a lot of heartache. And Joe will testify that I have always done my best to honor the Lord. Times when I did not want to stay married to that man, I stayed for the Lord. And there were times where he intended to harm me, whether it was with words, with actions, whatever. And I just knew that God was going to purpose that and use it for good. The death of my brother, I can see ways that God has used that for good in my life. My abortion story, as much as I hate that that's a part of my story, God has used that for good, to help other women find healing, to break free. There was a time when I was in college for hygiene school. It was maybe a year after my abortion, not even. And no one had really knew my abortion story. I hid that. And there was a girl in school who was pregnant. And God allowed me the opportunity to just share a little bit of what I've walked through with her. And it changed her mind to keep her baby. So she had her son during hygiene school, and he's like 6 or 7 now maybe, but she wanted to get an abortion. And there were other women in the class who were like, do it, do it, do it. And I was just able to, as much as I want to, I was able to pull her aside and say, listen, I've been there, I've walked through that. You don't want to do that. So God just allowing me to use again that awful thing in my life to turn around and use it for good. As much as I hate it, like, he will use those things. And I never thought that I would personally experience abortion. I was so anti-abortion, I was so against it. But sometimes when we are in moments of desperation, we make poor choices. And I'm not excusing my choice, but sometimes people do things out of desperation. And I think that walking through even that part of my life, it truly shows you the struggle and the chains and the bondage that other people are going through when they're in addiction or severe episodes of depression, or they're making these poor choices where, maybe in a good state, we would not make those decisions. But when you can kind of get a glimpse into the desperation that they must feel and the struggles and the bondage that they're in, you have so much more compassion on them. And I think that that's what I love most, is that even though all that was to harm me, God turned around and used it for good. And what I love most about Joseph too is, like, he had opportunity to take revenge, right? Like, he could have meditated on doing some pretty awful things once he got to a place of status or power, but he knew that God all along intended that to be for a purpose. And so also just staying in that place of, like, that friend that betrays you, or that family that came against you, or that ex-husband or wife or whoever that harmed you, when you come to the place of, like, am I gonna retaliate or show mercy and grace? Show mercy and grace, because God will take care of it. And when you just have that perspective of, like, God's in control, I'm the Lord's, he's allowed this to happen to me for some reason, it's just a powerful place to be, just knowing that I can just walk in this place. And when, right, like, we have a culture of offense. Everyone's offended. It's so easy to offend somebody. And Satan really uses that to cause division and to cause negative ripples if we allow him to use us in that way. So I just,
So, Macy, you're new to the faith, right? 8 months or so. So from that perspective, if somebody was to say to you, well, I'm that way because my parents were that way, or I'm that way because my boyfriend did this to me, or I'm that way because my husband did this, or my wife did that. Like, what would you say to that person, or how would you encourage that person to sort of say, no, that's not the case, and God's still going to love me, and I can lay that down and walk away from that?
Well, I would say that everybody's walk is different, and they could be the beginning. They could say that yes, and they can help themselves, and then once they help themselves, then they can continue the good ripples and possibly reach somebody else for the Lord. So the Lord uses us all in different ways, and like Liz was saying, you know, their situation is a situation for purpose. We don't know, but it comes to light eventually why we go through these things and why the Lord has allowed things in our life or hasn't allowed things in our life. It comes to light eventually. Sometimes we never see it, but most of the times, you know, we do. And I would say to just not necessarily not worry about them, but allow themselves to come to a place of freedom and